Imagine that work had taken over the world. Then would it be the center around which the rest of human life turned? Then everything else, the games once played, the songs once sung, the loves long fulfilled, would first come to resemble, and thereafter to become work. And then there would come a time, itself largely unobserved, when the many worlds that had existed before work took over the world vanished completely from cultural memory. And how in this world of total work would people speak and think and act? Everywhere they looked, they would see the pre-employed, the employed, the post-employed, and the unemployed, with no one uncounted in this census. Everywhere, they would laud and love work, opening their eyes to tasks and closing them only to sleep. And everywhere, an ethos of hard work would be championed as the key to happiness and success, laziness being deemed the gravest vice. In this world, eating, excreting, exercising, meditating, and resting would all be conducive to good health, which would in turn be conducive to being more and more productive. And in this world, no one would drink too much, and everyone would live indefinitely long. To be sure, often some quaint corners of the world, rumors would occasionally spread about death or suicide from overwork, but such sweet melodies would rightly be regarded as praise songs for the ultimate sacrifice. In all corners of the world, therefore, people would act with the sole intention of fulfilling total work's deepest longing, to see itself fully realized. This world, it turns out, is not a work of science fiction. It is unmistakably close to our own. It is West Germany, 1947. The country, now divided in two, has been shattered by war, with nearly 80% of buildings in major cities having been destroyed by Allied forces. The West German people, therefore, are very, very busy. They have not only a country, but also lives to rebuild. In this context, a lesser-known German philosopher named Joseph Pieper is sending his fellow citizens a message. He is urging them not to put their heads down and to get back to work immediately, but rather to stand back and reflect upon themselves and upon the situation they find themselves in. His book, Leisure, The Basis of Culture, is published 1 year later in 1948 and is then summarily forgotten. And what dangerous message did this strange book contain? Nothing less than a prophecy of a future in which total work would transform all human beings into workers and nothing else, while at the same time transforming all of human life into work. His prophecy has since come true. In the 21st century, we believe that we are all and only workers now. Yet this, I say, is cultural madness. But then how did we get here? How did work take over the world? The story I mean to tell consists of 4 chapters. In the first chapter, I'll discuss the ancient Greek slave society. In the second, the medieval tripartite society. In the third, our Protestant heritage. And in the fourth and final chapter, our cultural exhaustion. Chapter 1, Ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks came up with 2 insights relevant to our inquiry. The first was that labor, insofar as it tied one to the internal needs of the body, was itself a kind of enslavement. And the second was that freedom, political as well as contemplative, was one of the highest goods. And so they saw fit to design a slave society, one in which the many, slaves, would work so that the few, aristocrats, would be freed up to devote themselves to lives of political engagement and contemplation. Chapter 2, Medievals. What must be borne in mind about the medieval tripartite society is that it was rank ordered from top to bottom. On the very top were clerics, or those who prayed, as well as aristocrats, or those who fought, while on the very bottom were peasants, or those who worked the earth. Theirs must have been lives of trouble and toil. For the Greeks, then, work was ignoble, servile, contemptible, a curse. And for medievals, work just was penance for original sin. Chapter 3, Protestants. But then something astonishing happens as we enter the modern period. Luther, and especially Calvin, end up turning the value of work on its head. Truly, after the Protestant Reformation, our ideas about work would never be the same. Henceforth, work would be exalted, a duty for all of us, a responsibility for each of us, the ultimate source of fulfillment in life, and perhaps even the way in which we leave our lasting stamp on this world. In time, work would come to be the key to happiness and success and meaning and pretty much everything. And now chapter 4, us. Yet this period in which work was exalted is now being eclipsed by a new kind of cultural exhaustion. For Nietzsche, culture becomes exhausted and decadent when it gets stuck in worn out values while being unable to create new ones for itself. By now, total work has expanded into nearly every human domain, and now in its finale, it is birthing a civilization that is spiritually exhausted. This then is a road we have traveled. For the longest time, work just was a curse, then a necessary evil, then, and this almost miraculously, an object of exaltation. Only now is work delivering us into a period of culture-wide burnout. We are burned out and we can go no further. Perhaps the most radical act you can perform today is to observe the Sabbath. That is a day of complete rest. A day not to relax, not to recharge, not to restore yourself so that you can throw yourself into work the following days and months and eons, but rather a day devoted entirely to the contemplation of why you're here. All the Abrahamic faiths observe a day of rest for its own sake, as do Hindus, Buddhists, and many indigenous peoples. Secular culture, however, does not, because it cannot. Since its idol is work, it can do no more than give us over to weekends and Labor Days and vacations, all of which serve as downtime for unwinding and recharging before we resume the ceaseless busyness of our workaday existence. And so I ask you, might we have lost some of the wisdom that these traditions know and know so well? Listen very closely to the late Jewish theologian Abraham Heschel as he speaks of the essence of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not, he says, for the sake of the weekdays. The weekdays are for the sake of the Sabbath. It is not, he goes on, an interlude, but the climax of living. Summing up the main conclusion of Joseph Pieper's book on leisure, the philosopher Roger Scruton once joked, "Don't just do something, stand there." And so I say to all of us, may we stand there or sit here and thereby find out who we really are. Thank you.